Hey, Indian Creek 8th grade students, it's Professor Blazek, and I'd like to welcome you to another installment in our social studies video series looking at Expansion West and the Age of American Industry. In this video, part 5 in our series, we're going to be looking at important inventions from this time period. And the guiding question that I would like you to keep in mind is, how did inventions continue to improve life in America? Now, American inventors would match the growth of railroads during this time by introducing a number of very significant inventions. And these inventions would aid in areas like communication and transportation and would really help bring the nation closer together. Much like the expansion of railroads helped to connect every state and territory and bring different sections of the country closer together, these inventions would have a very similar impact. America's economy would also grow out of these new inventions because consumers were very eager to purchase new products that were introduced, and they could do so much more easily. Now, a couple of important inventions from this time period are pictured at the right. The top picture is one of an early automobile. And believe it or not, the bottom picture is actually the first vacuum cleaner. Obviously, it looks very different from what you might have in your home today, but this was the first conception of what would later become a household item. So just a couple of examples of important inventions from this time. Now, the first invention that I would like to talk about is the telegraph and the telegraph machine, which was invented by Samuel Morse in the year of 1844. Now, telegraphs are messages that are written in Morse code. I'm sure you can guess where that name comes from. And these messages can be transmitted almost instantly. So this was a major breakthrough in communication, and it would allow shopkeepers to use telegraphs to order goods. News reporters could send their stories via telegraph, and people could even transmit their own personal messages at their local telegraph office. So this made communication between cities and between states much more efficient because it would prevent having to rely on mail, which would take days or weeks, again, because telegraphs could be sent instantly. Now, an additional breakthrough in this area came in 1866 when a man named Cyrus Field laid a telegraph cable across the Atlantic Ocean. And this would allow the United States and the countries in Europe to communicate almost instantly, again, instead of having to rely on messages taking weeks crossing the Atlantic Ocean. And this would help bring America much closer to the rest of the world. Now, here's an example of Morse code and a message that would be sent as a telegraph. You can see that each letter and number is coded as a series of dots and dashes, and so a message would be coded into Morse code, transmitted at a telegraph office, and then decoded once it was received and given to the recipient. So this is how telegraphs would work, just to give you an idea of how these messages would look when they were sent across the country instantly. Now, an additional breakthrough in the area of communication came in 1876 when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. I'm sure you all know all about telephones and the fact that they would allow speech to be transmitted across hundreds or even thousands of miles. Again, this was the next step in communication. Now, businesses were very quick to purchase phones. They were the primary owners once the telephone had first been introduced, but telephones would soon become a very common household item, and they would allow friends and family to stay in touch over great distances. Again, because people were now moving all across the country, families and friends would need a way to stay in touch, and the telephone provided this opportunity. Now, another important invention from this time was the light bulb, and it was invented by Thomas Edison in 1879. Now, the light bulb was a breakthrough because it allowed for the lighting of factories and homes without having to rely on fire. So, this would obviously make lighting any area much less dangerous and would also take away the heat that came along with relying on fire for light. Now, Edison would continue his work with light bulbs and he would develop power plants that could distribute electricity, which would eventually make the powering of entire cities a possibility. And obviously, you can think about how much we rely on electricity now, and that will give you an idea of how big a breakthrough this was for the United States and for the world when Edison developed these power plants that could send electricity everywhere. Now, another important inventor from this time period was Henry Ford, who would revolutionize American industry overall. Now, he is obviously the one who created the Ford Motor Company, and he introduced the Model T automobile in the year of 1908. Now, the Model T was important because even though it wasn't the first car, it was much more affordable than any other car because Henry Ford had created a new method of manufacturing, which was called the assembly line. And a picture of an assembly line is shown there at the top. Now, in an assembly line, each worker completes the same job on every product. Rather than asking a worker to build an entire automobile, they would only be asked to complete one job, and they would do it for every single automobile on the assembly line. This would improve efficiency and would allow for a mass production of goods. And a mass production means the ability to produce a large amount of goods quickly and cheaply. And this was why the Model T was so important and what made it so much more affordable than any other car, because Ford and his company could create them so much more efficiently. And this concept of the assembly line and mass production would soon spread across different American industries. So a major breakthrough in how businesses would operate. Now, an additional breakthrough in transportation came in 1903 when the Wright brothers, who were named Orville and Wilbur, took flight at Kitty Hawk in North Carolina. Now, their first flight was only 120 feet, but it would inspire them to continue working to perfect a practical aircraft. And their work would lead to further advances in aviation, both commercially, so for just everyday people, and also militarily. And we'll see how this would impact World War I and then obviously any future wars that were fought around the world. So another breakthrough in transportation, kind of building on what had already begun with the railroad industry, came from the Wright brothers. Now, this is the end, believe it or not, of our discussion on some of the important inventions from this time period. There were obviously many others, but these were the major breakthroughs. So we will end the video again with our guiding question. If you need to go back and review any information in answering it, obviously you can. And I will be back soon with the next installment in our video series. Until then, this has been Professor Blazek signing off.